Boom. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about describing location in a distribution. So right now, this is my favorite lesson. Like, this is what my cat is named after. Her name is Norm because she is named after the normal distribution. I am not kidding you. Her name is Norm because of the normal distribution, because it's one of my favorite chapters to teach. So, you know, okay, so you know, like when they want to compare, like who did better? Did you do better on the SAT or the ACT? Well, the ACT and the SAT are not on the same scale, right? One is out of 2,400, and the ACT is what, out of 36? Is that what the ACT is, out of 36? I always forget. The SAT is out of 2,400. It used to be out of 2,400 with writing, 1,600 without. Is it still that way?
No, it's 1,600 now.
Okay, it's 1,600 altogether? Okay. So if you were to compare, you usually can't compare SAT to ACT because they're not on the same scale. So what we do is we have this thing called standardizing. And if you've taken AP psychology, you probably know about this because they talk about it. So, so we call it standardizing. Standardizing is what we do is, what it is converting scores from original values to standard deviation units. So we're going to take those scores and we are going to convert them to standard deviation. So that way we know how many standard deviations is this score away from the mean. That's what we're doing. And if you guys have taken AP psychology, this part isn't going to be new to you. And a standard deviation value is called a z-score. So again, you guys do a lot of, how many of you taken AP psychology? Okay, so you know what a z-score is. You're taking that z-score and you're converting it because we're going to start talking about that normal curve. Okay. So the one thing that you need to know is how to find the z-score. It's the observation x minus the mean, which is in this chapter is going to be the mu, okay? And the mu is going to be that population mean. And we're going to divide that all by the standard deviation. Which is sigma. Yes. Okay. Thing that you need to know is this is not on the formula sheet. So the AP Stats people give you a formula sheet for your exam, and there is a lot on the formula sheet except the z-score. Now there's versions of it on the formula sheet. You just have to know which version. This is your basic version of the z-score. The z-score changes once we get into larger not larger chapters, the higher chapters that we're going to study. Like when we start talking about inference, the z-score is going to change a little bit. We still use the basic one. So this one you actually have to remember because it's not on that formula sheet. Now, I want to point out something to you, and you guys, maybe you know this, but it never hurts to write it because it sinks in a little bit better. And it helps if you write the right word. A z-score. Sorry you guys at home. That's a z-score. Tells us how many standard deviations away from the mean the original score or the original observation is. I would say original observation falls and in which direction. That's the nice thing about a z-score. You can tell. And you should know your z-score is going to be positive or negative by looking at your original observation. So if your original observation is less than the mean, then you know that your z-score should be negative because that means it's below the mean, that your observation below the mean. Have you guys ever, well, you guys probably haven't, but have you ever taken a test and you're like, ooh, and then you find out what the mean is and you were below the mean? You don't have to admit it, okay, because I know you guys don't want to. But if you've ever been below the mean, that means your z-score is going to be negative. If you're ever above the mean, then your z-score would be positive. I have been below the mean. It is not a fun place to be. I like to be above the mean. I really like to be way above the mean, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So you're like, yeah, it does. It always happens. That's fine, and it's okay. But for me, listen, I trip up the stairs, so I'm below the average a lot. Because how many people have ever tripped up the stairs? Yes. Let's see, kindred spirits. Yes. Hey, you guys at home, have you tripped up the stairs? You might be with me. Okay, so standard deviation. So standardizing, our standard deviation is called a z-score. We have a z-score, and then it tells us it's going to be below the mean, and it's going to be negative. If it's below the mean, it's going to be positive. It's above the mean. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually do a practice problem because, like, I mean, I'm not trying to bore you to death, but I want to make sure because some people have not seen it. Okay, so that was a really bad one. Okay, so I finally looked it up. Okay, so we have an SAT score of 1350. Believe it or not, some of you think that that is the mean score. I looked it up. The mean score of the SAT is not 1350. It is 1060. Yes, I looked it up. And the standard deviation is 195. So when you feel bad, if you get an SAT and you don't tell anyone because you're like, oh my God, and you're freaking out, let's just all remember that that is not the mean, okay? So we're gonna find the SAT. We're gonna find the z-score. So we know in our head, right, that our z-score should be positive because our SAT score is above the mean. So I had to look it up last year. So we're going to do 1350 because that's our original observation is 1350. We're going to subtract out our mean, which is 1060. and then we're going to divide it by 195. On my paper, you guys, I'm going to show a lot more work than you would have to, but so the question I know is going to be, do we have to show this? Yes. If you're doing a normal curve problem, they're asking you to find a z-score, you have to show this. Like, you can't just go z-score and give them the z-score. You have to show them how to give the z-score because they want to see what you plugged in. Because here's the other kicker. If you, let's say you do something wrong in your calculator because, you got 15 minutes and you're trying to do something, but you set it up right, you can go from an I to a P because you knew what you were doing, you just got the wrong answer. Does that make sense? So they will give you points because if you showed up, right? You don't have to show this part. You do not have to show 290 over 195. I'm showing you that just to remind you that you need to do the top. And then we're going to go out 4 decimal places. 1.4872. That's your z-score. You can use your z-score to look up your percentile, okay? So we're going to talk about percentiles.